I want to welcome everyone. I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon for the final event of our fall speaker series, Rebuilding Trust in Democratic Institutions. Today's topic is Restoring Trust, Renewing Relations, Lessons from Tribal Governance. I am Lisa Lewis, Administrative Manager at the Whitburn Center. Please note that today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Whitburn Center's website and YouTube channel. Please keep your mics muted. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. And let me give you a quick overview of who we are. We were founded in 2021 through a generous gift from UWO alum Jerry Whitburn. The center conducts nonpartisan, practical research to improve governance and public policy in Wisconsin and beyond. Our goal is to strengthen local government, nonprofits, and communities by bringing people together to share knowledge and provide tools to support the public sector. And now I'll turn things over to the WISAC coordinator, Dr. Paul Van Auken, who will introduce our panelists and moderate our discussion.
Thanks, Lisa. WISAC, the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust, is a project managed by the Whitburn Center that promotes confidence in our political system, fair, safe, and secure elections, and peaceful engagement, building trust by building community, including through events like this. I'm going to introduce right now one of our students here at UW Oshkosh and the person that put together this panel, Aspen Rafak, and she's going to introduce the basis for the panel, and she's also going to serve as a panelist. Take it away, Aspen.
So my name is Aspen. I currently work with the Whitburn Center and WISACT as a YACT program coordinator. If you're interested in what that is, it's basically just a youth cohort that we formed within WISACT. We have 9 wonderful fellows right now. I also serve alongside my good friends and coworkers, Amanda and Areli. We're just trying to restore civic trust in youth, particularly throughout Wisconsin. I'm also a student. I'm a senior in the political science department at UWO. I'm also getting my law and policy minor and Indigenous studies certificate. I am a Chumash Nation descendant. If you're unfamiliar with Chumash, we come from like the southern region of California. And I was decided to lead this event because I'm also serving as the president of Intertribal Student Council. I do a lot of fun events this semester with like Native American Heritage Month, and I'm really passionate in the overlap between civic trust and Native communities. So that's why this was super important for me to do this month.
And do you want to say anything more about the information you put together on this slide here, Aspen?
Your slide went away. Well, I don't know if you stopped sharing.
Yeah.
I can start talking though, because I
There we
have
go.
Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. So I wanted to do this panel because we were looking for an event to do for November, and as you know, November is Native American Heritage Month, which is honored every November. It's a national celebration recognizing the histories, culture, and ongoing contributions of Indigenous peoples across the United States. It was established through 20th century advocacy events by Native leaders, and it was officially designated by President George H.W. Bush in the 90s. It also is a time to confront the realities of colonization, forced removal, cultural suppression, and the long-term impacts of federal policies. Many of these have led to, for very good reasons, a distrust between tribal communities and state and federal governments. So I wanted to have this conversation this month to kind of talk about how Wisconsin's story is inseparable from the sovereignty and stewardship of tribal nations, yet the path towards trust and true partnership remains unfinished. And to just kind of have a dialogue about how we continue down that path of restoring trust and what responsibilities Wisconsin has to serve its Native communities and work in collaboration with those communities. So, yeah.
Paul, looks like you're muted.
I should just have Aspen doing everything, but I was basically saying that it's probably easy to see why we're very proud to have Aspen as part of our group. and we have a lot of wonderful students here. And part of what we're trying to do with the WIAC program is to allow them to take ownership of events like these, because it's great training for them and because they're really good at this kind of stuff. So without further ado, I want to introduce our really great panel of panelists, and I'm just going to introduce them and then put their bios up on the screen. And then I would invite you to say a little bit more about yourself as you wish to. First, we have Dr. Renee Grailwitz from Brothertown. Renee, if you want to say anything more about yourself, that'd be great. Thanks for being here.
Great. I am just so honored to have been remembered and asked to participate. So thank you all for thinking of me. I have been a peacemaker for the Brothertown. I think that lasted for about 8 years that I was working as a peacemaker. And as a cultural medical anthropologist, I retired before I wanted to, but I retired in 2020 from UW Oshkosh. I started in UW Barron County in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. My great-grandmother, Tressie Brushall, is Stockbridge Munsee Mohican, as is my grandmother and my mother. So my descendancy there is very strong, and we participate in a lot of events there. And my Brothertown enrollment is because of that blood quantum business. And so I'm an enrolled Brothertown member. Thank you.
Thanks again for being here. Next, we have Amanda White Eagle. Thanks for being here, Amanda.
Good afternoon. Ho-chunk Rajra, Wipumakarega Hingaide, Hunchiki Karachwawanje, Egi Dejopeja Wadaje, Egi Niohwani Eja Hachiaje. So my name is Amanda White Eagle. I'm a member of the Ho-chunk Nation. I just introduced myself in Ho-chunk. I'm a member of the Bear Clan. I live in Black River Falls and Madison, because Madison is where I work. I'm the director of the Great Lakes Indigenous Law Center, but I have family and my home is in Black River Falls. So I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Thanks for being here. Looking forward to it too. Next, we have Roger Westcott. Roger.
Poso, can you hear me? Awesome. Poso Mauniwiak. My name is Roger Westcott. I work here at UW Oshkosh in the admissions office. I've worked here for quite a while, and before that, I was actually a student. So, been on campus for about 20 years now. I originally started my professional life as our Native American recruiter. So, for a good chunk of my professional career, one of my main duties was to recruit first year students to UW Oshkosh, and that included a lot of outreach, going to tribal schools or schools that had a high population of tribal students, and telling them how great UW Oshkosh is. And after that, I'm actually been elevated. I oversee the recruitment team now for all first year students, but I still do have a passion for our young Native students to come to UW Oshkosh. So as a point of reference, tomorrow and Friday, I'm actually doing some very specific recruitment trips geared towards some students up in the Menominee reservation area. In addition to the recruitment, former Chancellor Levitt had asked me to serve as the tribal liaison. So the Universities of Wisconsin has a policy written that every institution shall have a tribal liaison, and that role is more about the outreach to the tribes. Some obviously geared around education, but sometimes not necessarily just education. So working with tribal legislation boards and also tribal chairpersons, tribal men and tribal women. So it's a really cool role. Been blessed to be here this long. So thank you for allowing me to come today.
Awesome. Thanks, Roger. Next, we have Joe Stevenson.
Hey,
Joe,
guys.
thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Joe Stevenson, I'm a economic development planner with East Central. We work with I work with the Menominee quite frequently. on economic development, housing issues, and other planning related things there. We've had a handful of good grants through the USDA that have allowed us to do some good work up there. And I just want to thank everybody for inviting me here. I want to acknowledge that I do not come from Native American background. I have a lot of privilege being in this space. I do very much want to make sure I'm an ally and a supporter of our Native American populations throughout Wisconsin and throughout the nation. So here is a listener and supporter, and I can give little tidbits when I can. So thank you.
Thanks for being here, Joe. And again, thanks to all of you. It's a really great panel, and we're privileged and honored to have you with us. And the panel also, as I mentioned before, includes Aspen. And we have, it's a relatively sizable panel and a lot of good questions that Aspen put together. So the way I'd like to moderate it is to throw the question out and generally just let people who feel compelled to respond to that question do so. And if you don't, that's fine. But I'm not going to expect everyone to answer every question. I don't think we would have time for that, even though the discussion might be, super great, but it would take too long. So that's what we're planning on doing here. And we'll start with an icebreaker, kind of broad question for the panelists, which is, how would you describe the current relationship between Wisconsin's state institutions and tribal nations today? So anyone that feels compelled to go first with that one, you're welcome to go.
So I guess I'll kick us off. I would say that it's evolving. I think the relationship has been, maybe fractured in the past, but I do think that, like, for instance, the University of Wisconsin Law School is making efforts. So we have part of our strategic plan includes developing our relationships with Indigenous nations, and that's how I was hired. So I've only been here for less than 3 years, but my background has been entirely with my own tribe. I worked for my own tribe for almost 20 years as a tribe's attorney general, judicial officer, as an attorney. And then when the pandemic hit, I became a part of NYU and Yale at their American Indian Sovereignty Project. So my background has both been academic as well as with practitioners. And so after I was hired, there was an additional professor hired that was tenure track, and she's studying and writing about election law and tribes. And so we're, developing, but the Great Lakes Indigenous Law Center has been at UW Law School for over 20 years. But the efforts that are being made, UW has a pilot project for individuals that are from a federally recognized tribe in the state to have some tuition coverage. And I think that that's a step. Obviously, there could be additional steps made. But I think when I'm thinking about evolving, I could say that, in the past, there's been some serious concerns with state institutions and tribes. And so I'm hopeful that it'll be a movement towards I guess, a capacious relationship, that it should be broad as opposed to limiting.
Thanks.
I could also add to that. And when I speak, it's more specific to UW Oshkosh, because obviously that's where I'm working and I have more insight into. So please forgive if I'm not speaking correctly about any of our sister institutions, but I do serve as the tribal liaison, and we do have meetings as tribal liaisons throughout the year. So I do get to hear about some of the other institutions and their relationships with our 11 federally recognized tribes, and then the state recognized Brothertown. And we also have a tribal, I will say the word wrong, so my apologies, consultation every year. So all the different tribes can either send representatives, whether it be chair people, tribal legislatures, what have you, and they meet with the UW system, Universities of Wisconsin. So President Rothman, Dr. Sasane Sa Jennings, this past spring, Board of Regent Ed Deeds was there as well. And to kind of build off of Amanda's answer to this question is that it is evolving. This is something that I'm very proud to be part of this last few years, and seeing how um, we're able to continue to hopefully move forward and not necessarily have to stay in the past with some of the either injustices or things that as tribal members we felt we were wronged in. And I'm a product of the UW system, so I'm obviously going to be a champion for the system. But I do also want to say that there have been things that have happened in the past. This is public knowledge. For instance, UW Oshkosh, we do have a NAGPRA issue right now, the Repatriation Act. So the university is trying its best to right that wrong, and for that I have to give it credit, is in the sense that we're trying, and I think that's the best we can do.
Thanks,
I'd
Roger.
just like to jump in and say, yes, I think the institutions of higher education have made great strides. And it's amazing, given that the K-12 education about Indigenous history and Wisconsin history has been very weak, even though we've had Act 31. But the question was wonderfully vague, so I can point out that the institution of our prison system has not made great strides in any way, shape, or form about acknowledging any other population beliefs, behaviors, and values other than the dominant colonial society. And that our system still continues to target and incarcerate people who are not Caucasian. So under Governor Evers, great things have happened and are continuing to happen. And unfortunately, our relationship with the state always rests on who's the leader and who can veto and who can move actions forward. So under Governor Evers, I think a lot has changed for the good in many other aspects, though.
Thanks, Renee. Anyone else want to answer that one? Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Paul. I was
Go ahead.
gonna say, I'm a student and I'm not from Wisconsin, so I think I have a little bit of a unique perspective. I have been studying a lot under Dr. Margaret Hiddle, who leads the Indigenous Studies program here at UWO. But I just think that I come from Ohio, and in the area that I grew up, there was no federally recognized tribes or reservations. So moving to Wisconsin, I've noticed how the relationship between Wisconsin's institutions and tribal communities is very complex, and that's how I would describe it. Because with so much, I guess, legislation involving its relationships with tribal communities, I think it comes a lot of benefits and a lot of progress and growth, like what some of our other panels have been talking about. But then there's also a lot of unique setbacks and unique experiences that we've had with like racial discrimination and racism and things like the Walleye Wars and stuff like that. So I just think complex is a really good word to use, and I think it's particularly important considering a lot of our attendees might be from Florida and Atlanta and people out of state, just to know that when we're working with trust building in Wisconsin, it's a unique environment to be in.
Great. Okay, we'll move on to the next question, which is, from your perspective, what do tribal communities most need state leaders to understand about their histories and priorities before any conversation about trust even begins?
And I can chime in. I think one of the things that I had to learn, and I think others from governments need to learn, is that tribes are not just like a small city or rural America. They are a nation. They have their own culture. It's a far different world than doing. I come from a planning and economic development background. It's a far different world than doing planning and economic development just in rural America or just in a small place. And I remember so often people in the Menominee telling me that folks that come there that want to help them with economic development just kind of treat them like a small community, that they're just the same as other rural America areas, and they're not. And understanding that history goes back also a lot longer than rural America, understanding that this is literally, in some cases, thousands of years of history, not just the hundreds of years that maybe America was here. But that's one of the things that I personally I get a little frustrated when people come in and plan and don't understand that.
Thanks for that, Joe. Who else? Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, I think I would also build off of that, and it was actually something that happened in Dr. Van Auken's class when I spoke a few years ago, and it was talking about these communities, and for a lot of tribal members here in the state of Wisconsin, this is their homelands, their ancestral homelands, and people can have the best intentions of coming in and helping, but if they're not understanding or committed to that, this is people's lives. Like, we don't just get to fly in and leave when it's most convenient to us. Like, I have an obligation as a Menominee to this land, and I was just telling a class yesterday about this. Of in ceremony, I mentioned that I'm really proud of my daughters because they're learning my ceremonies and they're learning this way so that this doesn't die with me, that I'm continuing it on for future generations, and that for me, Menominees are going to be here. And state leaders, I don't know if they have that type of perspective, that long-term perspective of we've been here thousands of years, and our plan is to be here for another thousands of years. And you don't just get to fly in and out when it's most convenient for you. Like, there are people here that are living this day in and day out, and that's what we're looking at from our viewpoint.
And I'd like to jump in and reaffirm that trust is the big word here. Trust. And that trust doesn't come in because I'm here with the government. Trust me, I'm here to help you. Trust. And it takes years to build that trust. Didn't it, Joe? It took you years to work with the tribe before they actually, I mean, they're very friendly, very welcoming. We will, and thank you for your help when you're there. But that deep trust doesn't come easy. It comes after years of persistence and listening and not telling us, but that listening and trust takes years.
Yeah, I jokingly say that for the first year of me working with the Menominee, I just sat in the back and listened, right? And I showed up enough to where finally we had good discourse, and I'm even like called on sometimes to give an opinion or whatnot. But it takes time, and you're right. It takes bringing yourself back a little bit. I'm usually a very talkative person, as maybe you can tell, but in those spaces, you have to make sure that you're listening more than speaking, especially when you're first there. And it takes time to forge that relationship.
And I think the only thing that I would add is just understanding that all tribes are a bit different. So I think there's this desire to have like this pan-Indian approach and be like, well, this worked for Oneida, so ergo it's going to work for Ho-Chunk. And just knowing that our tribes are very, very different. So like when I introduced myself, I introduced my clan. My clan is Bear, and I get that from my father, who got it from his father. I have children that are enrolled Oneida, and their clan system is completely different and typically goes through their mothers as a matriarchal tribe. And so I think when you think about state leaders, I think there's just this like, okay, I'm here to do something, to fix something, or to do work. And I think maybe having Joe's approach of just sort of sit back and listen, I think is what's really needed.
Thanks for that. Anyone else want to add something on this question? All right, we'll move on to the next one, which is, what obligations do state and local governments and public institutions as a whole have towards restoring trust, both broadly in Wisconsin and specifically in tribal state relations, legal spaces, schools, and local civic bodies?
This question in there. I deliberately added in the word school because I think I've had some experiences as a student, both at UWO and some of the schools I transferred from, where there weren't set in stone procedures for what happens when a Native student maybe, experiences discrimination by a peer, by a faculty member even. And when you go into the Dean of Students office or you go into the counseling center, they obviously seem to care and they want to help you in some kind of way, but no groundwork has been done, in my experience, in a lot of state institutions like schools, to ensure that there's a procedure and a policy that happens, every single time something like this happens, so that it's handled in the same way and with the same care and consideration that, other things like Title IX or like other forms of racial discrimination do have policies and procedures for. So that's just one example. I think that having set in stone procedures is a really good starting point for state institutions.
I feel like I talked too much, but I want to emphasize what Aspen said was wonderful, because, and building off what Amanda was talking about, all the tribes are different. Our colonial institutions are not flexible enough. When I was teaching, I had a woman, an Indigenous woman, who had a death in her family. Well, the death rituals take quite a while. And as many times as I was trying to get the system to allow her to postpone, not withdraw from the institution, but to postpone some of these homework assignments so that she could grieve with her family in an appropriate manner and then not get penalized from our institution, I was not successful. And I don't know if that woman ever got a chance to continue her higher education or not, but our institutions are just not flexible enough to handle ceremony when it becomes necessary.
Any other thoughts on this one? All right, we'll move on to the next question, which is, how should Wisconsin's policymakers approach conversations with tribal nations, knowing that these relationships are shaped by generations of deliberate legal, political, and cultural harm?
Okay, here I go again. I think it would be wonderful if our policymakers actually acknowledged that statement. That's the hitch there, is I always hear, well, that's just history, doesn't matter. I didn't do it. My grandparents didn't do it. It doesn't matter. But if more people could acknowledge that one statement, that it was deliberate and intentional harm, boy, we could make 2 steps forward for something like that if that could happen.
I'll step in and kind of use an example. As we were working through this project, those of us that were involved, we kind of went back and forth about whether or not we were going to include a land acknowledgement. I have very mixed feelings about the land acknowledgement because I feel like oftentimes the people who write the land acknowledgements are not the people who need to be doing the acknowledging. I think oftentimes like universities and institutions kind of like look towards Native people to write land acknowledgements about the land that's like it belongs to them, like throughout history. So I think that making sure that institutions and policymakers are not being performative in their actions and policies and legislation, and that they're not, putting out a statement like a land acknowledgement just to say, here, fine, we acknowledged you, like here's breadcrumbs, here's the bare minimum. And instead, like actually work with tribal communities about what it is that they need and do things that involve more action rather than just like a statement.
And maybe to, push back on that just a little bit, because I agree, like we don't want it to be performative. I think Aspen's like completely correct there. But sometimes it provides like this basis of like you don't know anything. And so it provides like just the basic, right? Like whose land are you on? And so it provides sometimes just like a measure of like an understanding. um, but kind of thinking about like the exciting things that are happening now in like land back movements. We're seeing institutions like the church that are providing land back to tribes, and it's a movement that we'd like to get behind. And what can land back look like? It doesn't have to be just like, oh, here's the return of large swaths of land, which would be great, right? I'm not going to say don't do that, but it's also about stewardship and management. If you would like to see how the land was managed, working with tribes, I think is a way to ensure that there's like this policymaker approach to say, this is how the land was held, everything from, fire burning, to the restoration of prairie. Not being super articulate here, but I think if there's like harm that's been done, like providing this base knowledge is also very important.
And I'll go quick here. I think that I wish that kind of a little bit what Aspen said. I wish that policymakers weren't just checking a box sometimes, that it does feel sometimes performative or like just trying to get stakeholder input or something. One of the things that I think actions speak louder than the words, right? And when I work in with the Menominee, I can clearly see there's a host of economic development tools that the tribe is almost cut off from just because of the way that policy is written. It's very geared towards, again, it's geared towards cities, it's geared towards villages, those traditional incorporated areas in our state, and tribes don't neatly fall into that. So I think that if state policymakers can, one, I think be a little bit more curious, right? Learn a little bit more, understand the background, but then also dig a little deeper on some of those actionable policy changes that could open up more economic development tools for our native populations, I think would be great.
Great stuff. I'll just point out too that if you didn't see it, Dr. Sam Larson, who's the director of Whitburn Center, has posted a few helpful things in the chat, including a recent story about Lac du Flambeau tribe getting land back from the Catholic Church, which is quite an exciting development. I think we could also take a question from the Q&A because it relates to this specific topic if someone wants to answer it. And it's from Reverend Ellen Rasmussen asking for recommendations regarding repairing harm and working towards healing regarding forced separation of families with the history of Indian boarding schools and so forth. If anybody has any thoughts on specific steps that could be made in that direction.
Is this, and I probably won't even be able to have it answered in terms of like what the Canada is doing with some of their ceremonies that were returning the ancestors that they had found at boarding schools. Because if it is, I think that is the approach that we look at in this in terms of if any of our tribes here in the state of Wisconsin did have young kids go off to boarding schools and never return home, that they're working with those tribes to understand which ceremonies need to be done so that they can come home, and that they can be returned. I know that's what Canada was doing because they had found a lot of I could be misspeaking here, so I shouldn't even say it, but I want to say like over 130 young children at some of these boarding schools, and it came across just because being native and you hear that kind of stuff, and I know the tribes up there have been working with the Canadian government to be able to have those people returned, those ancestors returned, and if we're talking more of a broad sense of like the historical trauma that has happened based on boarding schools, and that could be a whole hour-long discussion with folks if we were to go deep into historical trauma. Um, I mean, most folks from these our native communities like myself have direct connection to that historical trauma that the boarding schools caused. So in that sense, there does need to be healing done at a community level, and for our policymakers or for anyone that really does have some sort of stake into that, I would highly suggest having those conversations as to what we could do to help that and help our future generations.
Thanks, Roger. Go ahead, Amanda.
So, recommendations on repairing the harm and healing, I think it's more or less just an understanding of what type of fracture is caused in terms of identity, in terms of family disruptions. There was, a concentrated effort at that during this time period to separate families. And part of that is the colonial legacy that I think Renee referenced like earlier. There was a concentrated effort by our government to destroy Native nations and ensure that they wouldn't have citizenry in order to continue. And it was done through a variety of means, boarding schools, blood quantum, and so when we look at this, I think in terms of recommendations on repairing and healing, it's going to take several generations and there will be a lot of mistrust. And so I think patience is one way, and having grace to realize that not all of us will speak our language, have our ceremonies, or may not look a certain way, but there's a lot of healing that has to go on, and sometimes some people aren't ready to talk about that yet. And so I think just really having patience, and I'm not gonna lie, like land back is a pretty solid move. But I think my response would just be that everybody's going to be at a different level. And so I think coming into that, realizing that we're all healing, because as Roger said, there isn't a single Native that I know that hasn't been impacted by removal or boarding schools. And that's a tough pill to swallow.
Can
Thanks
I
for
lighten the
sharing all
mood
that.
real quick and tell a story?
Do it.
So my mom went to boarding school. She grew up family. She had 11. There's 11 children. She went off to boarding school. So not like we came from money or anything like that. And she had just told me this story this year, first time ever. But at boarding school, she was really lonely. And the sister, the nun, kind of took to my mom, had her going to church every Sunday, all that kind of stuff. And then because my mom didn't have a lot of money, she had to write like this letter asking for money, basically. And then that nun like sent a picture of my mom with that letter to some rich benefactor who then sponsored my mom every month. So my mom would get like, I don't know, she said like $40 a month or something for her canteen at the boarding school. But she didn't know that at the time of what was happening. So like now I tease her when I see those commercials of like really poor looking kids and things like that. I'm like, oh mom, that was you. Like someone looked at your picture and thought that you needed some money, so they sent it to you. And she gets mad at me now, like jokingly, but it was like she didn't know that's what was happening. But at boarding school, like it was all in good nature. Like they trying to take care of her, but it was very funny. Looking back at it, that we can kind of have a laugh of um, them trying to take care of her, but in like a roundabout way, like a what would you call? I don't even know what you would call that. Like a slap to the face roundabout way. Like here, take care of this little poor Indian kid.
Thanks for sharing that, Roger. Let's move on to the next question, shall we? And that is, what does a respectful government to government relationship look like from a Native standpoint?
Start personal experience. However, my nation, we have the United States' largest marine life sanctuary now, because we started a small like water co-management effort just on the reservation, and then it gained a lot of like I guess public awareness in California, and then through the federal government, and then before Biden, before his term ended, he granted like a lot more land. I don't have the specific number, but it branches a great span of the coast of California now. That is now a co-management effort between the Chumash people and some other Native groups in California, and Native nations in California, and the state government of California, as an attempt to promote like, good environmental sustainability on our waters and the coast where it matters. I think particularly with the environment, nobody knows the land better than natives. And so having co-management efforts at the least, for like things like the Great Lakes here in Wisconsin would be very important and very crucial to the health of our waters here. And other environmental resources too. I'm just a really big water person, so.
Thanks, Aspen. Anyone else want to weigh in on that one? Go ahead, Roger.
I think, yeah, I would weigh in real quickly with just the idea of a government to government relationship is truly that, like the understanding that the native side that should be seen just as equal, and that we're not be giving a favor to be part of these conversations, that we deserve that right to be part of that conversation, and that the state and decisions made, even like for my tribe, Menominee, decisions made outside of our reservations do have effect of how we operate on our reservation. So to go with Aspen's example of the water, my sister was a water walker for several years, trying to protect not only the Wolf River, but the Menominee River, where our origin story comes from. If anyone has ever seen Bad River, the documentary in Line 5 that's going through their reservation, like yes, as a government, as a tribal nation within our reservation, within our boundaries, like we can hold our own, but there are things outside that will affect us, and that government to government relationship does have an impact on that, and understanding it's a partnership, in that and what they do outside of our reservations lines can still have an effect on our tribal members living on the reservation.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think, part of the concern with government to government consultation, it just sort of seems like it comes at the end as opposed to at the beginning. So the perception is that the decision is already made up, like the government has already made up its mind. And so on the back end, they're like, oh, but we have to consult. And so I think it just requires an explanation of how tribal input was incorporated into the outcome. And to me, I think that would be really important to say, like, okay, we can have this government to government relationship, but what are you doing with the information that you get? How is it being incorporated into something the state of Wisconsin does? How is it going to be incorporated into into the leader's thought process.
I want to ask a quick follow-up question. There was some momentum in this regard, at least on paper, a few years ago when the governor tasked the Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes with creating this climate crisis action plan that included quite a bit of information about Indigenous issues and the need to collaborate and that sort of thing. And then there were some changes in the EPA regulations about uh, bringing Indigenous groups to the table when there were planned developments that would impact them. But I wonder if anybody has any insight on whether those efforts have actually produced um, fruitful outcomes. Are there examples of this starting to make a difference in Wisconsin yet? Or is it mostly, technocratic talk and that kind of thing?
I can maybe chime in real quick. Maybe it just needs more time, but I don't get the impression that that it's made those policies have made huge impacts. I still feel like maybe what kind of Roger and Amanda were kind of talking about, that it still feels like a lot of those are box checking and talking after the fact rather than upfront when a project is going on. That's my impression. I could be wrong. There could be some great examples out there that I maybe just don't know about, but by and large, that's what I feel like what's happened in at least our neck of the woods.
Is that it's one thing to say that you're gonna partner with all these Native nations, and it's another thing to actually act on it. And so I had heard that there were like some changes in legislation, but I don't think I've seen really any like actual action come out of it. But also, it's not like my area of expertise either.
And it's certainly there are some big projects that are in the works, Back 40 Mine and Line 5 and things where you'd really hope that there would be that collaboration there to avoid, cultural and environmental disaster. But we'll have to keep working on that. In the interest of time, what I would like to suggest is participants, if you have questions, could you put them in the Q&A and then we'll get to them shortly. We'll also ask people to, voice their questions in a minute, but I want to give the panelists the opportunity to ask one more or to answer one more question, which is the final one. We're going to skip ahead to question 8, which is following the teachings that everything we do echoes forward 7 generations. What do you hope Wisconsin will look like 7 generations from now if we take seriously the work of renewing relations with each other and with the land?
I feel like that one's a heavy, like a meaty question. And I had the advantage of writing it, so I've had a little bit more time to think about it, I think, so I'll get started. For me, as a youth programmer with LISACT, I'm really focused on the youth, and the question we weren't able to get to before this was focused on youth and making sure that the things we do now echo forward 7 generations and the 7 generation principle and all of that. My hope is that more and more down the line, we'll create an environment where youth and specifically young natives and indigenous people with a capital I for Dr. Margaret, will be able to feel not only comfortable expressing like their voice and their opinion and their beliefs and their knowledge that they've inherited through these generations, but that they actually have a place where they belong to do that. I think that a lot of the times when we're doing these kinds of events and stuff, it's Native people who are like kind of trying to make these events happen. Like ITSE is leading all the events for Native American Heritage Month, which is great. But I'm hoping that in 7 generations from now, we'll have a environment in Wisconsin where like everybody is interested in what Native people have to say and believe that it's valuable knowledge, and something that young people feel like they don't have to necessarily put in extra work to share. It's just like an inherent thing that people want to listen to what young Indigenous people have to say.
I love hearing Aspen's voice. And I'm hoping the seventh generation philosophy starts not just Indigenous people welcoming and seeking out the youth opinion, but everybody looking to the youth. And the dominant culture has a habit of silencing the youth vote, the youth voice. Like, you haven't learned enough, therefore your opinion doesn't matter, and dismissing all of their life experiences. And I would love to see more people in all cultures reaching out and let me hear what your opinion is and what is that grounded in and what are your hopes. And so thank you for being the first one to answer that.
When I read this question, I would say that yes, I mentioned it earlier of the seven generations, or thinking of future generations specifically with my children, and how it pertains to ceremony. But that's what drives me. My ceremonies drive my life. There is a gray zone between how I live my life as a person who's I grew up on the reservation and has done some of that, to now a professional working at UW Oshkosh. But that's just it. It's as I look forward, I'm hoping that we can continue to have our ceremonies, which include the land, being stewards of the land, and being respectful of our, not only the land, but of all everything that surrounds us, and then being able to live biculturally. I have a really good friend of mine who does an entire presentation on living biculturally, and what he means by that is living in the world that I live in right now. Like, how do I live this, and then almost code switch over to my ceremony life. And for future generations to be able to have that, I think would be really good, in the sense of keeping that as part of what makes us the strength and the resilience that we've held so far, and that our ancestors have held, and just continuing to push that forward and push that into the relationships, and just being able to, what with the state of Wisconsin, and with institutions and all of that, is just being able to hold that true into your heart and into who you are as a human, and then have those relationships. So that's what I would think to the answer that question.
So I think all of these answers are great, and there's no like cap of like reality, which I'm gonna take a step away from. But I'd like to see clean water and air. I think, up in Black River Falls, there's this like perennial conversation around fracking. And the tribe will take a stance and say, we think that's a bad idea. So clean water and air, I think, would be ideal, especially when we're thinking about climate change and issues with forest fires in Canada and how we couldn't go outside some of the days this summer. I think about healthy land, so prairie forests and wetlands, and restoration projects that the university is working on here at UW. And then we have tribal actors that are working towards that. And then lastly, I think about climate, resilience, and how it's negatively impacting folks in Hawaii. And so I'm not thinking about just Wisconsin, but just generally like what we can do to mitigate impacts that all the rest of the nation's facing. So I enjoy this question because I can just answer broadly without thinking about all of the obstacles. But as a Native person, thinking about, grandchildren, children, and what I'd like to see for them, I'm not currently happy with what what we're dealing with. And so I love the fact that I can answer this with just endless optimism.
Well, that's probably a good note to end on, but I want to give the rest of our panelists a chance to add a final thought if you feel like it. And otherwise, if any participants have, we probably have just time for one question. And please check out what Dr. Larson put in the chat here. We've got a newsletter that focuses on Native American Heritage Month as well. And we'd love to, if you're not a member of WISACT or WIACT, you could sign up for both newsletters and keep in touch with all the things we're working on. Does anybody have a question they want to ask the panelists before we wrap up today, though? If you do, raise your hand or put it in the Q&A, please.
Personally, thanked all of our panelists. You guys have all been super helpful in responding to me and being patient with me and my weird hours between managing being a student and an employee and a staff member and an ITSE member. So I wanted to share my grace and thankfulness with you. And also, I think that the panel way exceeded my expectations, and everything that everybody had to say had a lot of wisdom in it. And I think it'll really stick and resonate with our audience. So I say thank you.
I would echo that. There is a comment or a question in the Q&A, Beth Rudy, wondering if contact information will be shared from the panel. I guess I would say if you are willing to share your email or whatever preferred contact you have, panelists, you could just put in the chat right now, and then Beth could reach out to you. Anyone else have a question? Well, again, thanks a million to the panelists and to everyone for joining us for this really interesting discussion. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to wrap us up here.
Yes, we want to thank everyone for coming. If you have any questions, you can email the Whitburn Center email at whitburncenter@uwosh.edu. And in the spring, our speaker series will shift to the theme of rebuilding trust with local government leaders. It is funded by a generous research grant from the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership. So stay tuned while we finalize these events. And thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks again. Bye, everybody.